Dr. Hans Gunther, professor at Berlin University, in his Racial Elements of European History, published in the 1920s, says, the investigations into the traces left behind them by that widespread Nordic people, the Sakai or Scythians, with its many tribes, are well worthy of attention. It had been living on the steppes of southeastern Europe and had spread as far as Turkestan and Afghanistan and even to the Indies. The ancient writers, such as Polemon of Ilium, Gallienus, Clement of Alexandria, and Adamantius, state that the Sakai were like the Celts and Germans and describe them as ruddy fair.
While Survive Pro offers a 3-year warranty, free delivery on every order today. It's an all-in-one kit with everything needed for survival. Includes emergency tools with easy access, proven and tested survival kit with waterproof tools for all weather conditions, long service life materials, military grade steel used in all of their products. Think ahead, be prepared, shop today. Find the link at the top of the description box below.
The Scythian tribe of the Elams are also described as having a Nordic appearance. Ammianus, who lived about AD 330 to 400, calls them, almost all tall and handsome, with hair almost yellow and a fierce look.
Today I'm reading from the blog Gnostic Warrior titled Odin, Pharaoh King Dan. The mythical Woden, or more commonly known as Odin, is said to be in legend the first unofficial founder king of Denmark, who had reigned before Christ in 1040 BC, which was the 8th year of the reign of King David of Israel. When I say that he was the unofficial founder king, I mean that he is not currently recognized as the founder and king of the current ruling Danish monarchy. The Danish monarchy today traced their lineage back to the Viking kings Gorm the Old and Harald Bluetooth from the 10th century, making the monarchy of Denmark the oldest in Europe.
Honor and glory be yours, Harald Bluetooth Gormson, mighty heir of King Gorm the Old and Tyra Danebod. Not only were you victorious on the battlefield against the armies of Norway, you also completed massive construction projects across the land, numerous ring fortresses to protect the populace from invasion and eternal strife. You successfully drove off waves of German settlers in 983 AD and sheltered your kingdom from unwanted foreign influence. Stalwart Viking, the time for greatness is upon you once more. You are called to rise up and lead your people to renewed power and triumph. Will you make the world shudder once more at the very thought of your great armies of Norsemen? Will you let the Viking battle cry ring out across the crashing waves? Will you build a civilization to stand the test of time?
The purpose of this message is not to validate or invalidate the current Danish monarchy, but to place a light on the hidden history of the founding of Denmark and its founder kings long before the 10th century AD. Viking kings had come onto the world stage. In order to do this, we must go back approximately another 2,000 years in time when the pharaohs had ruled Egypt on the other side of the world. The mythical King Dan I is the founder of Denmark. However, his real name was not Woden, Odin, or even King Dan I. These names are actually titles or assumed names that are derived from the Hebrew word Adonai, meaning my lords, from Adon, lord, owner, or master. The singular form of Adonai, my lord, this was used by the Phoenicians for the god Tammuz and is the origin of the Greek name Adonis.
Alright, going to show you something very interesting. There's actually a idol of Tammuz, the false god Tammuz, in the Vatican. And you have a statue of a woman who they think is Mary, but really it's the Babylonian Queen of Heaven in Jeremiah 44 verses, I think it's 17 to 25, weeping for, who they think is Jesus Christ, but of course it's a false image of Jesus Christ, and really it's the woman weeping for Tammuz. And I'm going to show you that because the Vatican, the Roman Catholic Vatican, is just filled with all kinds of pagan idols and pagan idolatry. It really resembles a pagan Roman temple. You really compare a Roman temple, even the exterior with the columns and the hallway, it resembles a pagan Greek Roman temple for their gods. That simple. So the Vatican and Roman Catholicism is just repackaged Greco-Roman paganism. We're going to show you Ezekiel chapter 8, verse number 14. It says, "Then he brought me to the door of the gate of the Lord's house, which was towards the north, and behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz." Okay, well, Tammuz is basically a false god of the Middle East. It's a false god of various regions of the Middle East.
Adonai, the name for both deity and to man, is used approximately 449 times in the Old Testament and 315 times in conjunction with Yahweh. The name Dan is short for Woden, Odin, whose names are titles that originate from Adonai, with the Greek version being the singular Adonai. Jews only use the singular in Adonai to refer to a distinguished person, such as we find in the Anglo-Saxons Woden or Norse Odin. Hence, the name of the Lord, the Jews use Adonai, the Greeks use Adoni, and the Norse Odin and Anglo-Saxons Woden. Similar names that mean the same thing as Adonai or Adoni you will find under various spellings. Today, in the occult and in Freemasonry, the most common use is under the Hebrew spelling of Adonai, and why in Masonic lodges there is always a Grand Adonai, also known as Grand Master, presiding over lodge activities. The first Odin, who all other Odins would be named after, was also known by other names such as King Tannius, King of Scythia, and in Latin as King Danus I, or more commonly today in English as King Dan I. King Tannius was a legendary king of the Goths. The 19th century scholar Gutschmid assigned his reign to 1323 BC to 1290 BC. In addition to these facts, just as Odin and King Dan I were worshipped as gods, so too was King Tannius worshipped as a god after his death.
If you recall, Samson was of the tribe of Dan. He was a judge of Israel, but he was very much of an apostate himself. He married a Philistine woman, and during the wedding feast, he proposed a riddle to the Philistines, which they just couldn't solve. The riddle that he gave to them was, out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. So on the seventh day of the wedding feast, Samson's bride prevailed upon him to reveal the meaning of the riddle. And Samson told the Philistines that he had killed the carcass of a young lion with his bare hands on the way to the Philistine country, and a swarm of bees produced. This kill had attracted a swarm of bees, which produced honey therein. Now, this riddle may even be a prophecy, if you want to look at it that way. The lion that Samson is referring to, the lion is the symbol of the tribe of Judah. And of course, Samson was a judge of the tribe of Dan. And Samson's killing the lion could be a prophecy about the tribe of Dan slaying and overcoming the tribe of Judah, represented by the lion. And the honey could mean this overturning of the tribe of Judah as the messianic, the tribe that would produce the Messiah, would produce the golden age, or the new age that the Zionists covet. They actually covet the birthright of Judah, and they're going to try to counterfeit it.
To recap the names, Danus or Dan is short for Woden or Odin, which are all derived from the same sources in Hebrew Adonai or Greek Adonis. You will find the names of the tribe of King Dan I's descendants who were given to us in Homer's Iliad as the Danaans, or tribe of Danae, grandchildren of Belus, otherwise known as Phoenician Baal, who gave their name to the Argives. All the kings of Denmark, Norwegian, Swedish, and Anglo-Saxons, and even the first president of the United States, George Washington, claimed descent from this bloodline. Could King Dan I actually be the Pharaoh king Hermaeus? Another name for Woden, Odin, or King Dan comes to us from the east. However, this name is not Norse or English, but an Egyptian name. Another name connected to King Dan I and Odin is none other than Pharaoh Horemheb, or Haremheb, meaning Horus is in jubilation. Before he became Pharaoh, Horemheb was the commander-in-chief of the army under the reigns of Tutankhamun and I. The large Nephor statue of Horemheb was found at Nacretus, the only Greek city in Egypt before Alexander. Horemheb, son of Crits and Smithus, explicitly calls himself a Greek. After the Greek Horemheb's accession to the Egyptian throne, he reformed the state, and it was under his reign that official action against the preceding Amara rulers began. Horemheb demolished monuments of Akhenaten, reusing their names in his own building projects, and usurped monuments of Tutankhamun and I. Upon his ascension, Horemheb initiated a comprehensive series of internal transformations to the power structures of Akhenaten's reign due to the preceding transfer of state power from Amun's priests to Akhenaten's government officials. Horemheb appointed judges and regional tribunes, reintroduced local religious authorities, and divided legal power between Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, between the viziers of Thebes and Memphis respectively. Horemheb, also known as King Dan I, was the last pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. He may also just be the unofficial founder of Denmark, and is also said to be the king of the Scythians during the reign of Sethos or Ramses I, king of Egypt. Sethos, also known as Sesostris, was the name of a legendary king of ancient Egypt who led a military expedition into parts of Europe as related by Herodotus. Tradition tells us that Odin, King Dan I, led the Asi Goths from the confines of Asia to northern Europe. There are other great historians like Josephus and Eusebius in which to cross-reference their versions with the Egyptian monuments and also the Bible that makes these characters come to life. The aforementioned sources affirm that there was, in fact, an Egyptian Hermes, who was also called Danaus and Sethosis. Josephus mentions the king as Ramses I and Set. Manetho also states that Sethos was called Egyptos and his brother Horemheb was called Danaos. All of these different ancient accounts, allegories, and legends place layers upon the true story which lies deep below the surface, that which we researchers take as clues to the real story, which is always concealed in legend and allegory on purpose from the profane. Hence, there is a reason for the confusion and a method to the chaos they create when attempting to make sense of the history. And according to Herodotus, Sesostris was succeeded by Pharaon and Pharaon by Proteus, in whose reign Troy was taken, and according to Manetho, Sesosthis was succeeded by Ramses and Ramses by Rameses, in whose reign Troy was taken according to Pliny. Therefore, Sesosthis and Sesostris were the same, and his ascension could not have been much earlier than 1283 or a century before the destruction of Troy, reckoning 3 reigns equivalent to 3 mean generations. This time frame also coincides with that of Pharaoh Horemheb's reign of 1319 BC to late 1292 BC or 1306 to late 1292 BC, if he ruled for 14 years. In addition, they also matched the almost exact dates for King Tannaeus, who was a legendary king of the Goths, who in the 19th century scholar Gutschmidt assigned his reign to 1323 to 1290 BC. These dates coincide exactly with that of King Dan I and the Greek pharaoh Horemheb's reign, whom, just like Odin and King Dan I, were worshipped as gods after their death. This is evidence for us to connect the truth hidden inside the stories that are all essentially one and the same that have been passed down to us by Josephus, Eusebius, Herodotus, and Pliny. In this story passed down by these historians, Sesostris, Horemheb, having during his own war expeditions to foreign lands placed his brother Harmaeus, Danaeus, as regent or viceroy in Egypt. While Sesostris was on expedition, his brother Horemheb, or Harmaeus, Danaeus, had conspired to destroy Sesostris and all his family in order to take the throne. Upon Sesostris learning of the plot and on his return to Egypt, he then expelled his brother Harmaeus, Danaeus, from Egyptian lands. Harmaeus, Danaeus, then led an exodus out of Egypt to Argos and founded there the Danid dynasty, or more commonly known as the tribe of Dan, which succeeded that of Aeneacos. However, Horemheb, Harmaeus, who called himself Greek and who seized the throne from a brother named Ramesses or Sethos, is the legend. The truth may actually be that Harmaeus, Ramesses, and Sethos are all one in the same person, or that Horemheb, Harmaeus, had actually usurped the throne of his brother Sethos and then became the forefather of a new Egyptian era under a new name of Ramesses and family that would have become the 18th dynasty. My intuition tells me that this story was told in this fashion to relate how the power that was once only held in Egypt was now also transferred to the Greeks in Argos, where they had founded the Danid dynasty. This, which essentially was an extension of their rule that now extended from Egypt to Greece and the new lands of Europe, which would be the new frontier for their future kingdoms that we can see today. This Greek Denmark and Egyptian connection with Harmaeus, also known as Armaeus, also known as Horemheb, or who we now call Seti or Suti, or Suti the First, actually, can all be verified in the 19th dynasty of ancient Egypt.
First off, how do you study King Tut's DNA?
Well, we didn't do this research on our own. We just reviewed what we found at the Discovery Channel. So this research was done by a team of scientists in 2009, but they didn't publish these results. We just found these results, and we had knowledge of interpretation, and we decided to publish it on our own because they refused to do so up to now.
So the descendants of King Tut, in this case, 70% of British men, 70% of Spanish men, and 60% of French men all belong to this genetic group?
Yes, exactly. Yes, they share a common ancestor with these pharaohs.
Well, talk about those common ancestors. Where were they from? Who were they exactly?
We think they lived around the Black Sea or maybe in the Caucasus, but we don't know exactly where they lived. But this group was founded by one man who lived about 9,500 years ago in this area around the Black Sea, but we can't tell exactly at this point of time.
Is this surprising?
Yes, it is very surprising because we didn't know that this lineage of Tutankhamun came from the Black Sea or from Anatolia or the Caucasus, because it didn't came from Egypt. This was surprising for us, yes.
Is it possible that because the group seems to be so large and includes so many, for example, 70% of British men or 70% of Spanish men and 60% of French men, that kind of thing, is it possible that there are other famous pharaohs or other famous people that are in this group?
Yes, I think so. It's possible. Of course, yes. As it's very big group, we sure have some other royal lineages which belong to this haplogroup.
Is it possible that it's even outside of the great Egyptian pharaohs and maybe other people?
Yes. We know of the last Russian Tsar, Nicholas II. He also belonged to the same haplogroup. He's also one of the famous ones who belonged to this group.
And what else is your research focusing in on now? Where do you take it from here? What happens next?
Well, what we wanted to do with this publication is to start the discussion, because I think it's very interesting to find this haplogroup in an ancient pharaoh, and we would like to know how did this lineage come to Egypt, and we of course are searching for the living closest relatives to this lineage by comparing the profile to the tests we will do within our project.
Well, we didn't mention the United States. I'm curious because a lot of the people in the United States, originally they've come from Europe. Mm-hmm. So have you studied the United States as well?
Well, we often concentrate on the European countries because our the customers of DNA companies from the United States do also want to know which European country they came from. Most Americans from Europe have British or for example German ancestry, so Western European, and I think there's also many men live in the United States with this haplogroup.
When Tutankhamun died while still a teenager, Horemheb had already been officially designated as the hereditary or crown prince and deputy of the king in the entire land by the child Pharaoh. These titles are found inscribed in Horemheb's then private Memphite tomb at Saqqara, which dates to the reign of Tutankhamun. Seti, or Seti I, was the forefather of the 19th dynasty, which was one of the periods of the Egyptian New Kingdom. He was from a military family in the Delta and a prominent general during the late 18th dynasty, which would be the 14th century BCE, under Pharaoh Amenhotep IV, who was placed in charge with the oversight of the Delta and is later mentioned as a vizier in monuments of his son, Pharaoh Ramesses I. And he reigned from 1318 to 1317, but gave his name to one of the most illustrious families in history, the Ramessides. He was followed by Seti I from 1317 to 1301. Ramesses I was also the high priest of Amun and played an important role in the restoration of the old religion following the Amarna heresy of a generation earlier under Akhenaten. Horemheb presumably remained childless since he appointed his vizier, Parames, as his successor, who would assume the thrones as Ramses I. This is also a very important fact to keep in mind when understanding that this is not only a new kingdom founded by an army general who was from the Hyksos region, but also the major other factors being the restoration of the old religion of Amun or Amon and Amon priesthood, indirect in its opposition to the Aten faith. This must have been one of the most important tumultuous times in Egyptian royalty and history, but also quite possibly the most important religious event in all of written history. The few moments of Ramses I proclaimed himself king of Nubia and southern Egypt as his brother Horemheb did in northern Egypt, and that the two brothers divided the power between them. It is also possible, as Josephus avers, that Ramses, called Set by Josephus, was the chief administrator of the two, and that he, when Haremhab usurped all the royal prerogatives, marched against his brother with his army and expelled him from Egypt.
In many respects, the career of this people is strikingly different from that of any other nation of equal historic renown. For 300 years, beginning with the days of Tacitus, their history consists of little else than a dreary record of barbarian slaughter and pillage. A century later, the Goths have become the mightiest nation in Europe. One of their kings sits on the throne of the Caesars, the wisest and most benevolent ruler that Italy has known for ages. The other reigns over Spain and the richest part of Gaul. We look forward 250 years and the Gothic kingdoms are no more. The nation itself has vanished from the stage of history, leaving scarcely a trace behind. In this relation, it is very important and interesting that in the Gothic epic of Beowulf, written around 1000 AD, the hero of the story, Beowulf, is a son of Ecgtheow, king of the Geats or Getae. The poem also relates many particulars in the history of the royal houses of the Danes, Swedes, Angles, and Ostrogoths, and you can look up Beowulf in Encyclopedia Britannica for the details on that. The name of the Goths may have vanished from history, but not the people, at least not in Germany and Scandinavia, for another form of Guttones is Teutones. A study of the articles Teutone and Teutonic languages in the Encyclopedia Britannica will inform the reader that the old Germans, Teutons, and Goths were one and the same family of people, speaking the same language, and believing in the same gods. So this tells us that there was a common origin to these people, and I guess as well as being in Lithuania, they would have been up in Estonia as well, collecting the amber from there and trading it, and suddenly they had enough numbers to actually take over Europe.
This would then have happened in 1322 BC. Ramses I, being the older of the two brothers, died, therefore, after a reign of 1 year, 4 months, for example, in the first months of 1320 BC. These stories coincide with the Greek myths of the kings of the Danaoi or Danans, who had all claimed descent from King Danas, who also had led a migration from Egypt, Israel, to Greece. The beginning of Greek history is often dated to this exile from Egypt of the Danaoi, who appear in classical writings as the Danans. You will also find them under other spellings, such as Danao, which is also used 138 times in the Iliad. These facts are paramount in understanding the Denmark and Egyptian connection with King Dan I, and more importantly, the split in kingdoms forcing the expelled King Dan I to flee to Argos, where he had founded the Danaid dynasty or the Danites. This was the tribe of Dan. This is no myth, because Hermaeus, who is Haremhab, or King Dan I, is written in stone on Egyptian monuments, which confirm these stories of Josephus and Eusebius, that now can rest on a historical fact based on these Egyptian inscriptions that have now been deciphered. The Greek-Egyptian pharaoh Haremhab, or Hermaeus, who was also King Dan I, would forever be immortalized under the Jewish and Adonai, Anglo-Saxon Woden, or the Norse Odin. Pharaoh Haremhab was the Adonai of the Amun priesthood and founding king of the mythical Scythians, tribe of Dan, and the Scandinavian countries such as Denmark or Denmark. Having subdued the country, King Dan I, also known as Pharaoh Haremhab, became lord and master of that land under the title of Woden Odin, and whose descendants would also take this name to later go on to conquer Sweden, Norway, Gaul, Ireland, Scotland, England, and Britain. From this point on, this great king would forever be immortalized by the Vikings as Odin, or the Anglo-Saxons as Woden, and worshipped as a god. The descendants of King Dan I, also known as Odin, otherwise the tribe of Dan, would go on for several centuries, founding many new countries in the Western world that still rule to this very day.
Well, I think that the history of Odin just shows, it proves basically the veracity of the Bible, that the kind of modern quote unquote scientific view that we've all lived where we are, and that we lived in Europe for 10,000 years, and we were these primitive cavemen who came out of the ice, and then suddenly Rome just civilized us. And the Britain, they lived in like swamps and huts and all that nonsense. Well, here you see that we've all been coming from the east, and it fits with the Bible story that Noah landed. He had 3 sons. They gradually spread out, and eventually they were supplanted by the Israelites, who spread out and became the replacement for that wider family. And by understanding that if all the Germanic tribes came from the east, and that the Romans as well, they didn't start in Italy, that many of the Greeks came from Egypt and the east. It just proves this story of the Bible, right? And you're not going to fall for this pagan nonsense or this fake science nonsense, right?